I heard about what happened at Sadnaya before I heard about what happened. It was January 2017. I had just spent a week outside of Houston in the coach house of somebody I'd known years before. They owned land, some land, and they had their own ranch house, but they had a little coach house off to the side. And they let me stay there for a while. I was alone for most of the time. I didn't watch TV. I just did my own thing. It was nice to be outside. Started having visions. One night I was in bed and I woke up in the middle of the night and I had this dream. There was this man, this beautiful man, and he was coming toward me. He was walking toward me. He looked as if he had some sort of royalty about him. I was happy to see him. There was some sort of attraction. The next week I heard that on that day that there had been an incursion into a city in Syria. And apparently, what I saw in my vision of welcoming that beautiful man with that royal air about him was not as well received in regards to the actual city of concern. You know, they do these things sometimes for some of us. The sacred feminine is actually a literal city, a literal place. It goes back a ways. It's one of the reasons they've attacked Syria the way they have in the last 10 years. They don't talk about this. Maybe the people for whom such knowledge is their first language or their first culture, maybe they have a reason for not making it very public. Some people learn about it in a different manner. The night I had that dream, I didn't think it was happening at that time. It wasn't real time. It seemed old. It seemed like something that had happened in the past. Like there was some alignment of different stars, and when they came together, there was supposed to be some sort of joy. And I've experienced this many times since. My cosmos was stolen, and somebody else has it, and they, by and large, engage it in manners completely contrary to what is actually naturally occurring cosmically and in conjunction with the Earth. And what would be happening if I was actually inhabiting my own cosmos without somebody else engaged in a horrendous forgery and attempting to cast into the unconscious based upon conscious fraudulent depictions of world events or alleged leaders, especially when we're contained and cut off from what are actual meaningful social engagements. I mean, they could call it banning, blacklisting. They could call it what they want. It basically amounts to a form of bankruptcy and poverty on their behalf that has compelled them, I guess, to a form of covetousness that's so significant. They can't even abide somebody else having simple satisfaction in human contact. But in the course of these things, great aberrations of what is actually supposed to be going on cosmically occur. There was an incursion into this particular city in Syria that was known at some point to have been aided by a response from Russia. It had a profound impact on me at the time. I was concerned because it was inverted. And this started happening when I returned to Texas in a very, very virulent way. All of the things that I put out, all of the things I imagined, all of the dreams, including what I understood to be some sort of cosmic messages, got inverted, literally. I was CCP'd for all kinds of other scenarios. The implication was, you don't understand, you're the whore. You're the beast. You're the criminal. You're the child molester. And if you play your part, then other people will be advantaged. As long as you refuse to be the whore, then these beautiful women you used to know are going to be annihilated. And that's when it began. Shortly thereafter, January 2017, I'm waiting outside of this place where presumably I can get some assistance with some things. They have these bars. on the gate in front of the building, and I'm standing there and I'm looking at them, and I'm not where I am. I'm somewhere else. It was real time. I'm like, I'm not here. And I saw something, the other side of my brain. I took my hand. I made it into a particular form. I formed it in a special way. And I took it and very slowly put it between two of the bars. I had a memory. It was horrible. It was horrible, and I heard it. They hung them. It was as if I was hearing somebody, almost in a trance, traumatized, talking. Almost as if they saw something and it traumatized them, and they were saying out loud what they observed, almost as if they couldn't believe it really happened. I could feel, I could hear it. It was strange. It was very far away. It was very far away, but I could hear it, and I knew, and I said, I'm going to find out what this is soon, aren't I? There were numbers. Sometime later, well, that's when they murdered those women. You didn't find out about it until a year later. They said that there was a mass grave of women's bodies outside of another city somewhere. That the women had been fleeing violence, but when they made it to the city, they weren't allowed in. And so they congregated outside of the city walls, and at some point were fallen upon and massacred and buried in a mass grave. It wasn't until a year later that they dug up the mass grave. My theory is that what happened is that there were digital cameras. And when the digital cameras began to take pictures of the exposed bones and what remained of the flesh, that the low-level radioactivity connected to the digital photography did something etherically. I spent 2 days on the floor of an abandoned building, screaming in excruciating pain. This was a unique experience for me, you know. Usually when such things happen, I don't know at the time what it is, and I find out later. I know certain things, it gets confirmed later, but this time was different because the first day it happened, and then at some point I ended up online and I saw, oh my God, that's what it is. And then they confirmed, yes, that's what it is. So the second day, I had to be conscious. I was trying to be rational, trying to be logical about it, and then I remembered the shelter before I was kidnapped. The radio tower. On the grounds of the alleged domestic violence shelter. The scenarios in the background. How I always got put in line to see my social worker right after a woman that while she was inside had something going on that made me think I was supposed to be communicating with ancient Chinese. Something ancient in China. And I hadn't been allowed to even think about for a long time. By the time it got to me, it was different. They murdered those women. Not just in one place, more than one place. How many mass graves of murdered women's bodies were exhumed in the Middle East between 2017 and 2019? Did anybody keep track? A year later, they'd said that there had been a report on how there had been this prison in Syria where they just summarily executed people. Most of them were identified as political dissenters, alleged to have been a threat to the regime or involved in some sort of subversive activity. This was different than the stories we get about ISIS, about al-Nusra. This is different. That they would go there, maybe if they got an appointment before the judge, 2 minutes. They couldn't identify anybody that didn't find a way to get recriminated. There was no trial. There was no consideration of the evidence. There was no attorney. When I read the story for the first time, I could feel it. Somewhere in my cosmos, I am connected to some buddies that were actually murdered there. I think I saw their deaths. I think I know why they did it. Now, you could say it might just be an elaborate ruse. And who would come up with something so macabre? I don't believe that. I don't believe it was just a ruse. In some dimension, that is what they did, if nothing else. But there's literal bodies. Now they want to backdate the history. Now they want to try to erase things that actually happened and say they didn't happen. They've been doing it to my life for the last 5 years. I'll talk to people. Just for a second. They'll bring up some story I don't remember, and they don't remember anything about the stories that I do. I'm supposed to believe, no. You're delusional. You've got a mental illness. It's not true. I'm not delusional. Now, if you allowed for a very macabre media misrepresentation, while you also flooded my unconscious with actual records of literal acts of torture and made me play out in some ultra dimension, some ritual of massacre, for whatever purpose you did, it doesn't change the fact that you had murderous intent. I know. I've had murderous intent in my life as well. I know these things. I know you have to pay somehow. And if you think you can claim somebody and put them in your stead as your slave to pay for your murder, well, I'm sure there are plenty of you who thought you were going to get away with it. Do you have any idea how many bodies have been racked up? I was so inconsequential to you, you just threw me in a mass grave with a bunch of other people whose names you didn't even know. Nobody knows their names, where they come from, if anybody loved them. How many of them were on the streets or in the middle of a field somewhere, completely abandoned for so long that if anybody ever did know or care about them, well, I mean, they've been gone for so long, nobody thinks about them anymore. They literally became disappeared, invisibilized. They became nothing more than a statistic that somebody gets to work as part of the hedging strategy connected to their electoral campaign. What do they do once they get elected? Are they going to spend a lot of time talking about ethics? The separation between church and state? Balance of trade? Separation of powers? Pleasuring the president? I don't know why I keep trying. I'm hoping that at some point I just end up out enduring you. I want you to break under the weight of your own shame.